Hi everyone, it's Teresa from Sewn Together here, and in this video I'm going to take you through the basics of traditional hand piecing. So it is a little different to English paper piecing. If you're not aware of the differences, check back through the videos that I've done. There is a video which explains the differences between hand piecing and English paper piecing. The traditional hand piecing that I'm going to do today is also sometimes called American piecing. I've always known it just as traditional hand piecing, and so that's what I'm going to stick with. So your supplies are pretty minimal and it's a great portable project. So let me swap cameras and let's go through what you need. So of course, first thing you need is fabric. So I have got a little bundle of fabrics here from my Tilda scrap basket. I've got a few different ranges. I've got some bigger pieces here that are left from a previous project. I've got some offcuts from a 2.5 pre-cut strip roll, and then I've got some unusual sizes as well. So this is a great project that we're going to be doing to use up lots of your scraps. So I will show you at the end how to piece your hexagons together, but also has some components that will make the hexagons as well. The next thing you're going to need is a pair of scissors. So I've got a mid-sized pair of scissors here, which I will use to cut threads and cut my fabric shapes as well. You can certainly use a ratchet cutter and a ruler if you choose to, but I like the portability of hand piecing, which means that I don't have to worry about having a ratchet cutter, ruler and mat. So I just need my pair of scissors is all I need. We need to be able to mark our cutting line and our stitching line. So I like to use, it's called a Pigma pen, and it's an archival ink. It's waterproof, and I like to use it. It's like a tan kind of colour. So it shows up on the back of most fabrics. It's waterproof, so it doesn't bleed. It's a nice fine point, and it's archival ink, so it's not going to do any damage to your fabrics as well. Having said that, I don't make heirloom quality quilts. I make functional quilts. So if you were doing a really precious quilt, I would probably be inclined to mark with something really carefully, such as a graphite pencil or something like that. And I do use a graphite pencil if I've got really light coloured fabrics that I think this pen might potentially could show through. And sometimes if it's an unusual colour, I will use a ceramic pencil similar to those that are made by Sewline and Bowen. So that's my pen. You can of course use any marking tool that you choose. Just remember that it could show up on the front and that you don't want it bleeding or running once it gets wet. The next thing we're going to need is some thread, and I like to use a 50 or 60 weight thread for traditional hand piecing. Very similar weight to what you would use in your sewing machine if you were machine stitching, and to be honest, a lot of those threads are actually really suitable. My favourite thread for hand stitching is called Athena, and it's a 60 weight long staple Egyptian cotton from Wonderful Threads. It comes in a range of 60 different colours, but it is the smoothest, most beautiful thread to work with for hand piecing, and I love using it on my sewing machine as well. So it's a fantastic thread, all-purpose thread to use. It's just beautiful. You'll need a few pins. You will need a needle. So I like to use a Gina Kimball needle, around about a size 9. So if you're not comfortable with a size 9, you can go down to a size 8, which is a little bit thicker. Anything bigger than a size 9, I find that I bend a little bit too much. So around about a size 8 or 9 is my ideal choice. And I use a Milner's needle. A Milner's needle, what makes that a little bit different is that let me have it under the camera, is the eye of the needle is actually not bigger than the shank of the needle. So it means that it will flow through your fabric really easily. a couple of pins. I like to use these little tiny clover applique pins. They don't tend to get in my way as much when I'm stitching. You can just use a regular glass-headed pin. I would suggest that you use a pin that's on the finer side. It's much easier to stitch. I hand stitch over my pins, and so if they're a finer pin, they're not in the road as much, which is probably not the best English, but it shows you. You'll see what I'm talking about as we start stitching. The next thing that we're going to need is you're going to need some form of template. So today I'm going to be using the largest template from my template set, our basic hexagon set of templates. So this is the 2.5 inch hexagon. So it's 2.5 inches along the finished edge plus our seam allowances all the way around. So one edge will be 2.5 inches. In this set of templates, you get a 1 inch hexie, a 1.5 inch hexie, a 2 inch and a 2.5 inch finished. So I'm going to be using the 2.5 inch today. So that's from our hexagon set A, and I will talk to you about smaller components of this hexie as we go along. So they'll come tied up with a little ribbon for you, but they all do actually have, put this down so you can see a little hole in the corner that you will be able to pop them on one of these rings. So these little rings you can get at office supplies type stores, and they come in a variety of different sizes. So they're just a little split ring. Okay. So I'm going to be using the 2.5 inch one today. The other thing that I've got that I like to use is called a design mat. So this design mat, and if I take all of this other stuff off here, out of the way, what I really like about the design mat is that when I pop my fabric down, if I was on a nice shiny bench, my fabric will slip. When I pop my fabric on a design mat, you can see that it actually grips to the fabric. Now this is a double-sided A3 size design mat. They're Australian and from an Australian company, but what it does is it stops everything sliding around on your mat and your table. Now they are not absolutely necessary, but they are really handy to have. Now my camera's actually picked up that I have got some fabric there, so it wants to focus on it, which is really good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my fabric. Now I have got just an offcut of a Tilda fabric. If I was wanting to focus cut my fabrics, it's really easy to do with our templates because they are completely transparent, and what I can do is I can lay that on and I can actually choose the motif that I'm wanting to cut or center. So this is pretty much an all over pattern. So I'm just going to flip it over, and it's actually called Tilda Sunny Park, which is just very cute. Okay, so I'm going to just pop my fabric down, and I'm going to lay my template in place. Because we're going to be hand piecing and not piecing on our machine, so we don't have as much risk with stretching, grain line when you're hand piecing is not as important. So you can actually get away with not having things exactly on the grain. So you can pick your motif that you would like and not worry too much about the grain. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trace around the outside of my template. And that outer edge gives me my cutting line. I'm going to mark my alignment points and my stitching line, work my way around. So I've got points in the corners, and then I've got a stitching line and a point, stitching line. So those alignment points are going to help me when I come to join my pieces together. And because I'm working on the design mat, my fabric's not slipping. Some of you would be used to using a sandpaper board if you've done lots of applique. They're definitely suitable to use. If you are finding your fabric slipping, try and find a tabletop or an area, perhaps even your rotary cutting mat that's not as slippery, that's something that's got a little bit of grip in it, so you can stop your fabric sliding so you get a nice accurate shape. So again, it's picked up that it loves this piece of fabric, and I think it's the contrast between the black and the fabric. So if I move this away, you can see on here that my shape is traced off. I've got my alignment points and I've got my stitching lines. So that makes it really easy when I come to join my pieces together. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut around the outside edge with a pair of scissors. If you prefer to cut with a rotary cutter, you most certainly can. There is absolutely no reason with these larger shapes. You just simply cut on the drawn line. Our 1/4 inch seam allowance is not as important when we're hand piecing as it is when you are machine piecing, because when you're machine piecing, that 1/4 inch seam is your guide to give you an accurate stitching line. But we've drawn our stitching line, and so we have our seam allowance can be a little bit flexible, but we have an accurate stitching line. So that's our prepared pieces. Pop that down there. Get rid of my scraps there, and then I've also got a second piece here as well. Okay, so you could then continue on and you could cut out as many as you choose, and I've started sewing a few together here. So I've got a few hexagons. You can lay them out. You could certainly let this project could just be a project that could just grow as you feel like it. Let me have a look where I think this would sit. And I think that I'm happy for it to be placed there. So I'm going to remove these bits and pieces and get ready to start stitching. Let's start our stitching. So I have got my pieces laid out the way that I want them to attach. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my stitching direction. So for me, I'm left-handed, so I'm going to stitch from left into the center and out again. If you're right-handed, you're going to stitch from the bottom corner into the center and back out again. So we are going to do it in one continuous row of stitching. We're not going to cut our thread part way through. So to start with, I'm just going to flip my fabric over so that I have it in the direction and I'm attaching it to the piece of fabric that it needs to be sewn to. Got my pins here, and I'm going to use a pin with an orange head on it. I like to use my little applique pins usually, but just so that you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to place a pin through the little orientation point or the alignment point on my top fabric, and then I'm going to pin through that same point on the back. Okay. Now, before we actually just put our pin in, what we need to make sure that we do is we need to make sure that our fabrics are one on top of the other and that our pin is straight. So if our pin is like that, so if our pin is crooked, our fabrics actually aren't lined up. So if we pin like that, what we're doing is we're not lining our fabrics up correctly. So just move your fabrics so that the pin, squeeze your fabrics together, one on top of the other, and squeeze them so that the pin is straight up and down, so it's a 90-degree angle to your fabric and that it's not pulled over left or right. Then pop your pin in, and we are going to do the same with our corner point as well. I'm going to use a black-headed pin here, and I'm going to pin through my alignment point in the corner, and also through my alignment point in the fabric on the back. So take your time and actually be accurate with your alignment points. Now, when we also need to make sure that when we squeeze our fabrics together, that our pin is facing straight up and that it's not tilted left to right. And then we can put it in place. So we've got our starting point, we've got our center alignment point, and we've got our destination. We are going to stitch, I'm going to stitch from left to right. We're going to stop here, but we're not going to cut our thread. We don't need another pin at the beginning because we're actually going to use our needle to align those points. So let me start with our alignment point on the front. Take it through to our fabric on the back. Okay. And again, make sure that your needle's standing up straight and that your fabrics are actually aligned properly. So I'm going to take a little tiny stitch. Now I have a knot in my end of my thread. Whether you decide to knot your thread is up to you. I do. It's force of habit and it's fine. I'm happy to have a little knot in the corner because my thread is fine. I'm going to then do a little tiny back stitch in the same spot. Now this is where I do I call it a figure 8 knot. I know there's dozens of different names, and I also use this knot when I'm English paper piecing as well. So thread is attached to the fabric underneath the front of the needle. I take it under the needle to the top. The thread that's attached to the eye of the needle goes under the needle, but it goes from top to bottom. And then just pull that through and you will have a lovely figure 8 tight knot. So our basic stitch that we do is actually just a little running stitch. So just load a few little running stitches on your needle. Now just a couple of millimeters for each stitch. Okay. And before you pull them through, just flip your work over and check that your stitches are on your stitching line on the back. If they're a thread or two out, that's okay, but if they're a long way out, then you need to pull your needle out and reload your stitches. So you pull it through. Now to start my next row of stitches, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little back stitch to start with, and then I'm going to just load a couple of needles on a couple of stitches on the needle. And I can usually load 4 or 5 stitches. Just check that they're okay. And I can do past my needle, my pin. Just keep loading up my stitches. Okay. Take my pin out once I'm past that point. Again, start with a little back stitch. Okay. So what I like to do after I've pulled my stitches through is just give it a little tug and make sure that my stitches aren't too tight. So the only tension that we have is back to our back stitch, so it won't pull your threads all the way through. So I'm just coming up to my needle, my pin that's in the corner. I'm going to take a stitch that goes right into that alignment point where my dots are. Pull my needle through. I'm going to take a second stitch, like a little back stitch, and I'm going to do the same knot that I did at the beginning of my stitching. So the thread that's attached to the fabric goes under the needle, and the thread that's attached to the eye of the needle goes under the needle from top to bottom. And I just pull that through, and that is my row of stitching completed. Okay. So I'll just pin my needle into my fabric so we can see what we've got to do. I just flip this back over again. you can see that we've stitched from here to here. We now need to stitch from there to there. So I am going to just fold my fabric that way. And again, this is my starting point. This is my starting point, and this is my destination. So let's pop a pin in the middle. Through my alignment point on the back. Making sure that my fabric is lined up so that I've got my pin is not off to an angle. It's standing up straight in my fabric and it's nicely lined up. It's my center and my end point, my destination. Okay. Now we are ready to stitch through from here to here. But at the moment, my thread is on the other side of this seam allowance. So my thread is here, and I need to start stitching here. So all I'm going to do is go through from one alignment point to the other. So I've just gone through my seam allowances that are here to come out at this point. I'm now going to do my first stitch, which will go through my alignment point for both layers, top and bottom, not through any seam allowances. I'm going to do a little stitch, going to do a back stitch, and again I'm going to do my figure 8 knot. So thread on the fabric goes underneath the needle from bottom to top. Thread that's on the eye of the needle goes under the needle from top to bottom. And just pull that through. And I can just check that everything's okay. I'm going to start loading up my stitches. Just check that they're in the right place. You will find that initially you find it really difficult to get tiny stitches with your hand stitching, but the more you stitch, the more you will find that your stitches become a little tinier. So I like to make them about 2 to 3, probably about 2 millimeters long, my stitches. And I generally can load 4 or 5 stitches on my needle in one go. So it's really quite a quick process. And my last stitch, I'm going right into where my pin is holding my layers together. Take my pin out. I'm going to do another little back stitch and my figure 8 knot, just the same as I have done at the beginning and end of each row. And that's my row of stitching complete. So to finish it off, what I like to do is I like to just go through to the back, flip it over, and I take one little stitch which is really close to my stitching line, pull my thread through, and then just clip my fabric close, or clip my thread close to my fabric, and it's disappeared in there. So if we open up our fabric again, you can see that we've got very neat, perfect little points, and you could give this a press as you go if you would like to, or you can just continue stitching on. So your next piece you could possibly add on here, or you can work in any direction that you want to. So if we have a close look at our stitches, you will see that they are quite tight. So they're not tight enough that they're bunching our fabric up, but they are quite firm in that if I pull it really tightly, you can actually see my stitches, but if you do that with machine stitching, you can see the stitches as well. So there you go, they're quite firm. So that's how to stitch our hexagons. So of course you can stitch lots and lots of hexagons. In our template set you have 4 different sizes of hexagons. So if you're wanting to stitch smaller hexagons, you could work with a 1.5 inch hexie, which you can see is quite a bit smaller, or you can even go down to a very popular 1 inch hexie as well. So that will give you lots of things to work with. I love the fact that with the 2.5 inch hexies you actually get a long way really quickly. But of course you may find that you get a little bored just stitching hexies. So I do have some options that you can grow into. So with our hexie set you get a set of 4 hexies, but if you're looking for something a little bit more to work with, or your fabric pieces aren't quite as large, what we have is we have a half hexie set in those same 4 sizes. So 2 pieces will make a half hexie. So the 2 half hexies will make exactly the same size hexie as we've got. You can also work with a 60-degree diamond. Let me slide that up there. So of course 3 diamonds will make a hexie as well, and the sizes actually are the same edge measurement. So a 2.5 inch diamond will work with a 2.5 inch hexie, or 1 inch diamond will work with a 1 inch hexie. Okay, so that's that one. There is also what we call a crown. So I'm going to, let me put that one that way. So a crown, 3 crowns, let me turn it around so that's not this one. 3 crown shapes will also make a hexagon as well. And then if you like triangles, we have our equilateral triangles. So 6 of these will make a hexie, or 2 of these will make a diamond. So that gives you lots and lots of options to play with to use up your scrap basket if you get a little bit bored making hexies. So I think we've got you started and shown you just how simple and easy traditional hand piecing can be. That basic stitching that we're doing is the same for any pieces. If you're stitching a curve, you might find you need to clip your curve a little bit, but the basic principle is exactly the same. You might need a couple more pins, but this is the basic steps in getting started with your hexies. I hope you enjoy some hand piecing. It's a nice portable project. It's a great project if you don't want to be tied to your sewing machine, or if you don't have a sewing machine. So it's a great way to get started with some patchwork in a nice, easy, simple, stress-free manner. So I will put a link in the notes below that you can shop for our hexie sets. We do post them all over the world. If you want more information, head over to the website, and I will just be progressively adding more videos, and I hope you enjoy them. So we'll see you again soon. Bye.